Hey everyone, and welcome to my channel. Today, I'm going to be showing you how to replace your car's ignition system in 6 easy steps. This is a relatively simple process that can be done at home with a few basic tools. First, we'll start by disconnecting the battery. This is important to do for safety reasons, as it will prevent any electrical shocks. Next, we'll remove the old ignition coil and spark plugs. Once these are out, we can install the new ones. After that, we'll need to connect the new ignition coil to the spark plugs and the battery. Finally, we'll start the car and make sure that everything is working properly. So, if you're looking to save some money on car repairs, or if you're just interested in learning how to do it yourself, then be sure to check out this video. I'll walk you through each step of the process, and by the end, you'll be able to replace your car's ignition system like a pro. The first step is to disconnect the battery. This is important for safety reasons, as it will prevent you from getting shocked while working on the ignition system. To disconnect the battery, simply loosen the negative terminal, the black one, with a wrench and then remove it from the battery post. The next step is to remove the steering wheel. This may seem like a daunting task, but it's actually quite simple. First, you'll need to remove the airbag. To do this, locate the 2 small holes on the back of the steering wheel. Insert a small screwdriver into each hole and press down on the spring clips. This will release the airbag, and you can then carefully remove it. Once the airbag is removed, you'll need to remove the steering wheel itself. To do this, locate the bolt in the center of the steering wheel and loosen it with a wrench. Once the bolt is loose, you can simply pull the steering wheel off of the steering column. With the steering wheel removed, you'll now have access to the ignition switch. The ignition switch is located on the steering column, just below the steering wheel. To remove the ignition switch, you'll need to remove the 2 screws that hold it in place. Once the screws are removed, you can simply pull the ignition switch out of the steering column. Now it's time to install the new ignition switch. Simply insert the new switch into the steering column and tighten the 2 screws that hold it in place. Once the new ignition switch is installed, you can reconnect the battery. To do this, simply attach the negative terminal, the black one, to the battery post and tighten it with a wrench. The final step is to test the new ignition system. To do this, simply turn the key in the ignition and see if the car starts. If the car starts, then you've successfully replaced the ignition system. Replacing your car's ignition system is a relatively simple process that can be completed in a few hours. By following these steps, you can save yourself a lot of money and time. Alright, now that the steering wheel is out of the way, let's move on to removing the switches. You'll need to disconnect any electrical connectors that are attached to the switches, and then use a screwdriver to remove the screws that hold them in place. Be careful not to lose any of the screws, as you'll need them to put everything back together later. With the switches out of the way, you should be able to see the ignition switch. It's usually located behind the steering column, and it's held in place by a few screws. Remove these screws and carefully pull the ignition switch out of the column. The ignition cylinder is the part of the ignition switch that the key goes into. To remove it, you'll need to insert the key and turn it to the on position. This will release a small tab that holds the cylinder in place. Once the tab is released, you can pull the cylinder out of the switch. Now that you've removed all of the old parts, it's time to install the new ones. Start by inserting the new ignition cylinder into the switch. Make sure that the tab is engaged, and then turn the key to the off position. Next, install the new ignition switch into the steering column and tighten the screws. Finally, reconnect the electrical connectors to the switches and reinstall the steering wheel. And that's it. You've successfully replaced your car's ignition system.